The late autumn sky over New York wore a thin silver-grey cloak, with clouds drifting across as if whispering secrets known only to themselves. Anthony Reed stood by the wide glass window of the San Francisco airport lounge, his hand gently gripping the worn corner of his leather bag. On the surface, he looked like any ordinary sort of 50-year-old man, preparing for a routine business trip, wearing a simple grey polo shirt, plain khaki pants, and clean but unremarkable sneakers, carrying no luxury briefcase or expensive watch. Every detail was carefully calculated to give no hint of power or status. But behind this unassuming appearance lay a meticulous plan he had nurtured for months. Over the past 6 months, Anthony, CEO and largest shareholder of Aurora Airways, had been receiving troubling reports that left him uneasy. These were not mere isolated complaints. They were pieces of a dark puzzle revealing a quietly deteriorating service culture. Passengers of color were scrutinized more intensely, served with delays or cold indifference, and sometimes even openly questioned about their right to sit in business class. Having dedicated his life to building an airline synonymous with quality and respect, Anthony knew that if he did not witness things for himself, all reports and explanations from subordinates would merely serve as a veil hiding the truth. He carefully chose today's SFO to JFK flight, a route with one of the highest volumes of business and political travelers, where service pressure was intense and every mistake quickly exposed. He booked seat 1B without going through the privileges department, without notifying anyone in operations. The plan was to travel alone, no assistant, no entourage, so that everyone would see him as just another anonymous passenger among hundreds. Anthony understood clearly that the true power of going undercover was not in catching someone in wrongdoing, but in sensing the genuine atmosphere of the place he led. Small moments, a glance, a word, the way a flight attendant chooses whom to serve first, often carried more meaning than quarterly numbers in a report. He had once experienced being misjudged based on appearance when he was young, and that memory had never faded. It made him believe that corporate culture could not be measured by KPIs or revenue alone, but had to be touched, felt, and sometimes endured. The announcement echoed through the lounge, calling business-class passengers to board Aurora Airways Flight 407. Anthony took a deep breath and approached gate number 6 with the calm demeanor of someone seasoned in travel, but inside him was a mix of curiosity, anxiety, and determination. He knew that in just a few minutes he would no longer be the powerful CEO of Aurora Airways, but a regular passenger, a living test of his own policies and people. And in that silence, he silently vowed, if his suspicions proved true, today would mark the beginning of a change no one at Aurora had ever imagined. As Anthony stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool air conditioning of the business class cabin brushed gently against his skin, carrying the distinct scent of new leather seats and a faint fragrance from a passenger who had just passed by. He slowly made his way to seat 1B, placed his bag in the overhead compartment, and sat down, his eyes scanning the surroundings, noting details that seemed trivial but could reveal much. The nearby seats were sparsely occupied. Some passengers focused intently on their phones, others engaged in quiet conversations. The atmosphere remained calm, with no signs of disturbance. But that moment was quickly shattered. A white man, around 50, 5 years old, confident in demeanor, strode down the aisle and cast an appraising glance over Anthony from head to toe. No greeting, no smile, just a silent, condescending look before he continued toward a seat further back. Anthony was familiar with such looks. They were quiet, but laden with unspoken assumptions about a person's place in that space. He smiled softly to steady himself, maintaining his calm composure. Minutes later, a tall woman with neatly tied hair, dressed in a crisp-lead flight attendant uniform, approached. Her name tag read Claire Bennett. Her voice was steady and polite, yet carried a certain coldness. "Sir, I believe there is a mistake with this seat. This is the business class cabin. May I see your boarding pass, please?" Anthony did not respond immediately, simply handing over the neatly folded paper ticket. Claire glanced at it, nodded slightly, but pressed her lips together, as if the information she saw was not quite convincing. "Oh, that's unusual. But you see, this seat is reserved for privileged passengers. If you'd like, I can assist you in finding a more suitable seat in economy." Her words were loud enough for nearby rows to hear. Anthony sensed several eyes turning toward him, some curious, others seemingly pleased. He took a slow breath, pulled his phone from his pocket, and quickly typed a brief message to operations. "Code Silver, Gate 6, immediate assistance required." Setting the phone down, he looked up, his tone still calm and quiet. "I will be sitting in my assigned seat." Claire paused for a moment, their eyes locking briefly before she turned away. Anthony knew the real game had just begun. With only a little more time, the hidden truths within the system would reveal themselves, and he would need no further questioning. Inside, he felt his heartbeat steady, not from anger, but from anticipation, the moment to witness the true face of a problem he had long suspected. Less than a minute after Claire walked away, Anthony noticed a subtle yet unmistakable shift in the atmosphere. The white man from before, whom Anthony guessed was David Collins from a brief exchange with a flight attendant, sat with his legs crossed a few rows behind, leaning back slightly with a fleeting smile, the kind of smile belonging to someone who just witnessed what they hoped for. No words were needed. That expression alone told Anthony that, for some, his presence here was already a disruption that needed correction. From a distance, Anthony saw a young flight attendant, petite with brown hair, tied in a ponytail, Maya Torres, holding a tablet, glancing briefly in his direction before pausing. Her gaze was unlike Claire's. It carried hesitation and a hint of uncertainty. Moments later, Maya approached Anthony, bowed slightly, and whispered softly enough for no one else to hear. "Sir, I just checked the system. Your ticket is fully valid. Seat 1B has been booked and fully paid." Her voice was cautious, as if walking a fine line between duty and conscience. Anthony nodded gently in response. "I know. Thank you." Without further words, Maya turned toward the galley, leaving behind a look half willing to help, half fearful of involvement. But the brief calm lasted only a few breaths. David Collins suddenly spoke up loud enough. "Maybe next time people like you should pick seats appropriate for yourselves instead of causing trouble here." His words, sharp and cold, pierced the air and forced many eyes to turn toward Anthony. Some passengers frowned subtly, while others feigned looking out the window, avoiding the discomfort now palpable. Anthony remained seated, hands resting on his thighs, his gaze calm. He had faced situations like this many times before, moments where a heated reaction could turn everything against him. Instead of responding, he stayed silent, letting a small but weighty action take place. He pulled out his phone, opened the security app, and sent an urgent alert to Aurora Airways' senior operations team. The message was brief. Code Silver. Immediate response at Gate 6, Flight 407. As the phone screen went dark, Anthony leaned back in his seat, feeling his own breath steady. He knew the message would cause key figures at headquarters to leave their meetings immediately, and in just a few minutes their arrival would change the entire game. Meanwhile, he would remain seated here, like an ordinary passenger, watching carefully to see who would act how, unaware of whom they were facing. Just about 7 minutes after the urgent message was sent, a quiet but powerful shift began to ripple through the business class cabin. From the aircraft door, Anthony spotted a tall man in a dark blue suit, moving with the agility of someone intimately familiar with every corner of the airport. Mark Stevens, Aurora Airways Vice President of External Relations. Flanking him were 2 uniformed airport managers, their name tags neatly displayed, shadowing his every step like bodyguards. Mark was unhurried, yet every step was deliberate, his eyes scanning the cabin as if gauging the atmosphere before deciding what to say. Upon locking eyes with Anthony, he gave a slight nod, a gesture confirming that the Code Silver alert had been received and was being acted upon. Claire Bennett, standing near the beverage service area, turned and momentarily froze at the sight of Mark. Her eyes flicked between him and Anthony before quickly turning away, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed everything. Anthony keenly sensed the moment when power in the cabin shifted from Claire's vague insinuations and unofficial control to the silent yet overwhelming presence of a superior with the authority to change decisions instantly. Mark approached and stopped at Anthony's row. He neither bent down nor shook hands, simply stood upright and spoke low enough for no one else to hear. "I came as quickly as I could. We'll handle this discreetly before the plane takes off." Anthony nodded slightly, replying, "Good. I want to observe everyone's reactions clearly before we talk." Without another word, Mark turned to the 2 airport managers, exchanging brief instructions. One of them stepped to the front of the cabin and calmly but firmly announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, we must delay boarding for a few minutes to address an internal matter." No details were given, but it was enough for passengers to understand that something serious was underway. Meanwhile, Claire remained motionless, no longer approaching Anthony. Maya Torres, from the meal preparation area, quietly glanced his way before returning to her duties as if nothing had happened. Anthony caught that look and knew that beneath the cautious expressions there were those who would choose what is right, even if only through a small action. He sat silently, fingers interlaced, allowing these moments to etch themselves into the memories of all present. Because Anthony understood that once the truth was brought to light, they would recall every detail and realize which arcade of the story they stood on. The silence in the business class cabin was no longer the calm relaxation before a flight, but resembled the still surface of a lake disturbed by a heavy stone. Ripples spread slowly yet irresistibly, making everyone feel that something had changed. Across the aisle, an Asian American woman of about 50, Linda Park, leaned slightly into the aisle, directing her gaze toward Anthony and speaking just loud enough. "I just want to say, thank you for handling this so calmly. No one should be treated like that, here or anywhere else." Her words were soft, but enough to draw a few passengers to look up. A man in a grey suit, seated 3 rows back, nodded slowly and added, "Indeed, the way you handled that was truly admirable." Low murmurs began to ripple through the cabin, and Anthony sensed that the heavy tension from before was shifting into a different kind of quiet, a tacit agreement mixed with slight embarrassment. Some passengers looked down, perhaps wondering if they had ever faced a similar situation, and chosen silence. Claire Bennett still stood near the galley, but clearly no longer had the courage to approach Anthony's row. Her shoulders hunched slightly, eyes avoiding direct contact. Things became clearer when the business class intercom rang sharply 3 times. Maya Torres answered quietly, nodded, then approached Claire and whispered, "The captain wants to see you in the cockpit." Without objection, Claire nodded slightly and quickly walked forward, the cockpit door closing behind her. From that moment until the end of the flight, Anthony would see no more of her in the cabin. Meanwhile, Maya quietly approached Anthony, bent slightly, and asked softly, "Would you like some water, sir?" Anthony smiled gently. "Thank you. Just a glass of room temperature water." She nodded and left, leaving behind a sense of calm very different from what he had just endured. Anthony took a sip, set the glass on the small table before him, and opened the book he had brought. He knew he wouldn't read more than a few pages, but the act was a silent declaration. He would sit firmly in his rightful seat, calm and resolute, until this matter was thoroughly resolved. Anthony sat quietly for a while longer, observing the rhythm of activity in the cabin, like a theatre-goer who knows the script by heart, yet still wants to hear every line. While the plane remained docked at the pushback position, he opened his bag and took out a small leather notebook with slightly worn edges, something he always carried on important trips. Flipping to a blank page, Anthony began to write in steady, unhurried handwriting. Flight 407, business class passenger handling incident. Step 1, system verification. Step 2, crew behavior observation. Step 3, record passenger reactions. He slightly tilted his head, signaling Maya as she passed by. "Could you please convey to Captain Robert Hayes that I would like a private meeting for a few minutes?" His voice was gentle, but carried a firmness that made it clear this was no casual request. Maya looked briefly surprised, then nodded and left. Just 2 minutes later, the cockpit door opened, and Captain Hayes appeared. He was about 48 years old, stocky in build, walking calmly but decisively. "Mr. Reed, if convenient, we can talk in the service area up front," Hayes said with a low, respectful tone. Anthony stood, following him into the narrow space between the cockpit and business class cabin. There, his voice lowered, each word clear. "I'm not here seeking an apology. I want clarity. What happened to me today is not an isolated case. I have received multiple similar reports and need to know the exact cause." Hayes paused for a few seconds, then nodded. "I understand. I will prepare a full report, leaving no detail out, and forward it directly to the internal audit team. There will be no cover you pass." Anthony placed his hand on the notebook, as if sealing an important clause. "Good. And remember, loyalty without responsibility is merely an excuse to hide wrongdoing." The exchange ended briefly, but its echo followed Hayes back to the cockpit. Anthony returned to his seat, reopened the notebook, and began outlining an action plan. Auditing service procedures, mandating retraining on fairness and anti-bias, establishing an anonymous hotline, temporarily suspending involved parties for investigation, and rewarding staff who demonstrated integrity. Those lines appeared clearly, like a blueprint for the wave of reform, set to begin as soon as the plane landed. The wheels touched down on the JFK runway with a deep, solid thud, sending a gentle vibration through the cabin. Anthony sat upright, fastening his watch strap once more, a gesture preparing him for the next phase of his journey. Not as an anonymous passenger, but as the leader about to enter a strategic meeting right at the airport. As the plane taxied along the taxiway toward the gate, the seatbelt sign remained illuminated, but Maya approached quietly, lowering her voice. "Sir, Mr. Mark Stevens is waiting in a temporary meeting room near the gate. They have arranged a private session for you to work immediately after disembarking." Anthony nodded slightly, his gaze steady, then tucked his leather notebook away. The moment the door opened, the crisp, early winter air of New York flooded in. He stepped out unhurriedly, each step radiating confidence. Just outside, Mark Stevens, accompanied by 2 legal officers and a human resources representative, awaited him. No introductions were necessary. A brief handshake was enough to kick off the work. The temporary meeting room was located on the 2nd floor of the gate area, its frosted glass ensuring privacy. Anthony chose a seat at the head of the table, back to the glass wall, eyes scanning each person present. His voice low but clear. "Let's begin immediately. What happened was not an isolated incident. I have received similar reports for months. From this moment, we implement the Aurora Integrity Protocol." He outlined the objectives, conducting a full audit of passenger service reports over the past 90 days, requiring all frontline staff to attend mandatory training on fairness and bias management, establishing an anonymous hotline for complaints, and immediately suspending personnel directly involved until investigations conclude. Mark took rapid notes, nodding with each point. The HR representative looked up, hesitating slightly. "Sir, the media is demanding an official statement. Should we issue a release now?" Anthony shook his head firmly. "No. No one speaks until I do. This message must come from the highest level, not as a reactive statement, but as a proactive commitment." His gaze swept the table, pausing on each person as if sealing his words. "We are not merely handling an incident. We will change how Aurora treats every passenger, so no one ever has to witness today's events again." The next morning, the main lobby of Aurora Airways headquarters in Manhattan lit up earlier than usual. Outside, television vans were parked side by side, antennas raised high, cameras aimed at the entrance. The revolving door slowly opened, and Anthony Reed stepped out with Mark Stevens, wearing no long coat, just a dark blue suit and grey tie, with a calm face but eyes that missed no detail. The podium was ready. Behind it, a backdrop printed with the Aurora logo and the slogan, "Every passenger, every time." As Anthony approached, the camera shutters clicked incessantly. He paused, placing both hands on the edge of the podium, looked straight into the lenses, then spoke in a deep, measured voice. "Yes, I was the passenger in seat 1B on flight 407 yesterday. I was suspected, questioned, and asked to leave my rightful seat. But this story is not just about me. It is about anyone who has ever been judged by a first glance. Aurora Airways serves millions of people every year, and I have seen firsthand that some of them do not receive the respect they deserve. He paused, letting the silence fill the room for a few seconds before continuing. From today, we will change. Not with empty apologies, but with actions, policies, and clear responsibility. I commit that every Aurora employee, from ground staff to aircrew, will undergo regular training on fairness and unbiased service. We will review all reports from the past 90 days and thoroughly address every violation. Most importantly, we will ensure that no matter what you wear, where you come from, or which seat you occupy, you will be treated with absolute respect. His final words lowered in tone but not in conviction. This is a promise, not only as a CEO but as a person who has experienced this. We will do better, and we will do it now. Without taking questions, Anthony stepped down from the podium and blended into his team. In the rows behind, a few reporters whispered to each other, while cameras continued to follow his every step. The message had been delivered, concise, direct, and leaving no room for doubt. Just hours after the speech, the video capturing Anthony Reid's commitment appeared on nearly every major news outlet and spread rapidly across social media. Sharp, concise headlines. CEO takes immediate action after facing discrimination on his own airline. Flooded Twitter, LinkedIn, and aviation industry forums alike. Inside Aurora Airways, the ripple effect was even more pronounced. The internal email system received hundreds of responses from employees across branches, some expressing support, others sharing similar incidents they had witnessed but never dared to report. The Human Resources Department swiftly established an anonymous hotline, exactly as Anthony had announced, and on the very first day, more than 30 calls were logged. At regional offices, managers were summoned for urgent meetings to roll out the Aurora Integrity Protocol. While some staff showed concern, most recognized this was no mere temporary public relations campaign. The CEO's personal experience and public disclosure sent a clear message. This change was genuine and non-negotiable. At JFK Airport, Maya Torres received an email directly from HR, notifying her that her action of checking and confirming the validity of Seat 1B was recorded as a positive example of professional courage. Anthony personally sent her a brief message. "Thank you for doing the right thing, even when it was not easy." As for Claire Bennett, the decision to suspend her temporarily was made that very afternoon, pending a full investigation. The story spread among the flight crew faster than any official announcement, a reminder that every word and gesture on board could become a measure of the airline's values. That evening, Anthony sat in the Manhattan office, reviewing the list of reform measures. In the leather-bound notebook he had kept since the flight, he marked the items implemented within 24 hours, smiling softly as he saw most had made their initial progress. But he also knew this was just the beginning, the kickoff of a long journey to turn promises into the very way of life at Aurora Airways. 1 week later, the initial changes of the Aurora Integrity Protocol were officially underway. Training sessions on fairness and anti-bias were held simultaneously in multiple cities, from Los Angeles to Boston. Scenes from the classrooms showed flight attendants, ticket agents, and mid-level managers sitting in circles, listening and discussing. Anthony insisted that every session begin with the question, if the passenger sitting in front of you were a family member, how would you treat them? During an online meeting with all 35,000 employees, Anthony appeared on camera wearing a simple blue shirt, with a window behind him opening to a cityscape. His voice was slow but confident. I want Aurora to be a place where everyone, from passengers to staff, feels they belong. That doesn't happen naturally. It must be built, maintained, and protected every day. Maya Torres, from the training center in Chicago, was introduced as one of the living examples of the airline's value of doing the right thing. Anthony announced she would take on a new role, Director of Cabin Culture, a position created to sustain and develop the new service standards. Applause echoed through hundreds of video conference frames as Maya bowed her head slightly, her eyes shining with emotion. Outside Aurora, the international aviation community also took notice. Some airlines sent congratulations, while others quietly reviewed their own processes. On social media, passengers shared their stories with the hashtag #EveryPassenger, every time, turning it into a movement spreading beyond US borders. Anthony was keenly aware that this wave would eventually subside. Public attention would shift to another story. But what mattered to him was not the media spotlight, but what remained after the chatter. A fairer operating system, people empowered to choose what is right, and a culture that refuses to accept silence in the face of injustice. That night, as he closed the leather-bound notebook that had accompanied him throughout Flight 407, Anthony wrote the final line. The commitment does not end here. This is only the beginning. From the perspective of someone knowledgeable in leadership and corporate culture management, Anthony Reid's story reveals an immutable principle. The true strength of an organization does not lie in its brand or profit figures, but in how it treats people in moments that seem the smallest. When a leader dares to step down to the ordinary seats, to see with their own eyes, hear with their own ears, and feel with their own heart, that is when they truly master the culture of the organization. Sustainable change always begins with decisive, fair, and transparent actions like these. If you find this story inspiring, please hit like and subscribe to join us on journeys exploring stories of leadership, justice, and the power of change. Don't forget to leave a comment with the phrase "respect" to help spread the message that everyone, everywhere, deserves to be treated with full respect.